The room went silent the moment the waitress answered the ambassador in a language the CEO didn't even recognize. Rain slid slowly down the glass walls of the Blackstone Grand Hotel, turning Manhattan into a blur of silver lights and reflections. Inside the ballroom, everything shimmered. Crystal chandeliers glowed above marble floors polished so perfectly they reflected the movement of every designer heel and tailored Italian shoe crossing the room. Soft piano music floated through the air, while servers in black uniforms moved quietly between tables carrying champagne worth more than most people's monthly rent. Clara Bennett adjusted the sleeve of her cream-colored dress near the service entrance and lowered her eyes for a second. The fabric was simple. Too simple for this room. She already knew that. The zipper on her regular uniform had broken 20 minutes earlier, and the manager had handed her the emergency backup dress with visible disappointment. "Just try not to stand out tonight," he had whispered nervously before rushing away toward the VIP guests. But standing out was exactly what happened the moment she entered the ballroom. Nathaniel Reed noticed her instantly. Of course he did. Men like Nathaniel noticed everything. Especially flaws. Especially people who didn't belong. At 38, Nathaniel Reed carried power the way other men carried cologne. Effortlessly. Coldly. His dark navy suit looked perfectly sculpted against his tall frame, and the silver watch beneath his cuff probably cost more than Clara's car. Investors laughed at everything he said. Hotel executives straightened when he walked by. Even waiters moved faster around him. Nathaniel glanced up from his conversation with a senator just as Clara stepped beside the champagne tower holding a silver tray. For half a second, his eyes lingered on her dress. Then came the smile. Small, sharp, dangerous. Interesting choice for an international event, he said loudly enough for the people around him to hear. A few soft laughs followed immediately. One woman covered her mouth behind a wine glass. Another man smirked while adjusting his cufflinks. Clara kept walking as if she hadn't heard him. But she had. Every word. Her fingers tightened slightly around the tray, though her expression never changed. Nathaniel watched her longer than necessary. Most people reacted when he spoke. They laughed too hard, apologized too quickly, tried to impress him. But this waitress simply continued across the ballroom with calm, measured steps like his opinion carried no weight at all. Oddly enough, that irritated him more. "You'd think the hotel could afford a proper dress code," muttered one of Nathaniel's business partners quietly. Nathaniel swirled the bourbon in his glass. Maybe simplicity is making a comeback. More laughter. Clara reached table 12 and carefully placed sparkling water beside an elderly diplomat without spilling a single drop. Her posture remained elegant despite the tension tightening invisibly beneath her ribs. She had worked enough double shifts in Manhattan to recognize men like Nathaniel Reed instantly. Men who confused wealth with wisdom. Men who thought dignity could be measured by fabric labels and price tags. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the skyline. Rain tapped softly against the towering windows while guests continued arriving beneath the golden lights of the ballroom. Tonight's event mattered. Everyone knew it. A $4 billion energy partnership sat waiting on the edge of approval, and half the city's financial elite had gathered to witness it happen. Cameras flashed near the entrance as journalists tried to capture glimpses of politicians and foreign delegates entering the hall. Clara quietly refilled water glasses near the center table when the atmosphere suddenly shifted. It happened subtly at first. A ripple of movement. Security straightening their posture. Executives lowering their voices. Then the ballroom doors opened. Ambassador Kareem Al-Fayed entered with measured steps beside two aides dressed in dark tailored suits. The conversations around the room softened almost instantly. Even Nathaniel Reed straightened his jacket before approaching the ambassador with his polished corporate smile already prepared. Kareem Al-Fayed was known for many things. Brilliant negotiations. Impossible standards. Absolute intolerance for disrespect. "Your Excellency," Nathaniel greeted smoothly, extending his hand. "Welcome to New York." The ambassador nodded politely, though his expression remained unreadable. "Mr. Reed." His deep voice carried calm authority through the room. Clara lowered her gaze respectfully while passing behind them with another tray of drinks. She noticed the ambassador's eyes briefly pause on the ballroom before narrowing almost invisibly. He was observing everything. The lighting, the staff, the energy in the room. Men like him always did. Nathaniel began introducing board members and international investors, while photographers snapped pictures nearby. Every movement felt rehearsed, controlled, perfect. But perfection rarely survives pressure for long. As Clara reached the far side of the ballroom, she heard Nathaniel laughing again behind her. "At least tonight should be memorable," he said casually to one investor. Even the waitstaff came dressed for attention. More quiet laughter followed. Clara stopped for the briefest moment beside the wine station. Her reflection stared back at her faintly through the dark glass window beside the bottles. Cream dress, old black heels, hair pinned neatly back. Nothing impressive, nothing powerful, and yet something in her eyes remained steady, calm, unshaken. Because Nathaniel Reed had no idea who he was talking to, and before the night was over, neither would anyone else in that ballroom. The ballroom grew louder as the night deepened, but Clara Bennett moved through the noise like silence itself. Crystal glasses clinked beneath the chandeliers while waiters crossed polished marble, carrying trays of imported wine and tiny plates decorated more carefully than most people decorated their homes. Outside, Manhattan disappeared behind sheets of cold rain. Inside, Power sat at every table wearing tailored suits and expensive smiles. Clara paused near the service station to steady the silver tray in her hands. The weight barely registered anymore. After 3 years of 12-hour shifts, her body had learned how to keep moving even when exhaustion pressed into her bones. "Table 7 needs another bottle of Bordeaux," her manager whispered urgently while adjusting his tie for the 5th time in 10 minutes. "And stay close to the Reed table tonight. If anything goes wrong, we are finished." Clara nodded quietly. Of course. The manager hurried away without another word. Nobody noticed the small leather notebook tucked partially inside Clara's apron pocket. Nobody noticed the Arabic handwriting covering the corners of the pages either. To everyone else, she was simply another waitress trying to survive New York City rent prices and endless night shifts. That was exactly how Clara preferred it. Attention complicated things. Attention created questions, and questions had ruined her life once already. Near the center of the ballroom, Nathaniel Reed leaned against the edge of the VIP table while listening to a senator ramble about international trade routes. His expression remained polite but impatient. Nathaniel hated delays, hated unpredictability even more. The partnership with Al Fayed Global Energy was supposed to close tonight. Every number had been rehearsed, every speech approved, every detail controlled down to the flowers placed beside the stage. Yet something about the ambassador unsettled him already. Kareem Al Fayed had arrived calm, observant, unreadable. Men like that were dangerous in negotiation rooms because they spoke less and noticed more. Nathaniel lifted his bourbon glass just as Clara approached to refill the water beside him. "You know," he said casually without looking at her, "this event has diplomats from 6 countries attending." Clara remained focused on the glasses. "Yes, sir. That means presentation matters." His voice carried quiet amusement now. People tend to judge what they see first. Clara placed the water pitcher down carefully. Sometimes that is true. Nathaniel finally looked at her directly. Her calm response annoyed him again. No embarrassment. No apology. Just stillness. "You do not seem very concerned about first impressions." Clara met his eyes for one brief second. "I have learned they are often inaccurate." The senator beside Nathaniel chuckled awkwardly into his drink, unsure whether the waitress had just challenged one of the most powerful executives in Manhattan. Nathaniel's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Before he could answer, movement near the ballroom entrance interrupted the conversation. One of the ambassador's aides approached quickly and whispered something into Kareem Al Fayed's ear. The ambassador's expression shifted slightly. Not anger, not concern, something colder. He stood slowly from the table and began speaking to his team in rapid Arabic. Around the room, confusion spread immediately. The official translator beside Nathaniel hurried forward, adjusting his glasses nervously while trying to keep up. Clara lowered her gaze and continued arranging glasses on a nearby tray, but every word reached her clearly. Classical Arabic. Formal. Precise. The ambassador was not discussing greetings anymore. He was questioning contract terms. Specifically one transportation clause involving oil distribution rights through European ports. The translator hesitated. Sweat gathered near his collar. "His Excellency says the partnership numbers are acceptable," the translator announced uncertainly. Clara's hand stopped for half a second. That was not what the ambassador had said at all. Nathaniel noticed Kareem's expression harden immediately after the translation. One of the ambassador's aides exchanged a sharp look with another delegate. The atmosphere shifted. Quietly, dangerously, Nathaniel stepped forward with a practiced smile. Please assure His Excellency we are fully committed to transparency. The translator repeated the sentence in awkward Arabic. This time the ambassador answered immediately. Fast. Sharp. The translator froze again. Silence spread across the table. Nathaniel's confidence began cracking beneath the surface. Investors noticed it instantly. Powerful men always recognized the scent of uncertainty. Clara stood motionless beside the wine station, listening carefully while thunder rolled outside the windows. She could already see the problem forming. The translator did not understand the ambassador's dialect variation. Worse, he was mistranslating political nuance as business language. One wrong sentence in rooms like this could destroy years of negotiation. Kareem Al-Fayed slowly removed his glasses and placed them onto the table. The soft sound echoed louder than it should have. Is there a problem? Nathaniel asked carefully. The translator swallowed hard before speaking. The ambassador says he feels the agreement may contain disrespect toward his country's authority. Several executives shifted uncomfortably. Nathaniel's expression darkened instantly. That is impossible. Across the ballroom, the piano music continued softly, absurdly calm against the tension tightening near the VIP table. Clara watched the ambassador's face carefully. He was not angry because of the contract. He was angry because nobody in the room was truly understanding him. And Nathaniel Reed, the man who believed appearance defined value, was seconds away from losing the biggest deal of his career while standing inside a ballroom filled with people he desperately needed to impress. Clara lowered her eyes again and quietly picked up another silver tray. But inside, something old and carefully buried had already begun waking up. The tension around the VIP table spread through the ballroom like cold smoke. Conversations softened. Forks paused halfway to expensive porcelain plates. Even the piano player near the stage began pressing the keys more carefully, sensing something shifting beneath the polished elegance of the evening. Nathaniel Reed stood perfectly still beside Ambassador Kareem Al-Fayed, though inside, irritation was rapidly turning into alarm. The translator adjusted his glasses again, clearly struggling. His Excellency believes the wording regarding transport authority is offensive, he repeated uncertainly. Nathaniel forced a controlled smile. That cannot possibly be correct. One of the ambassador's aides answered sharply in Arabic. The translator hesitated again before attempting to respond. Wrong tone, wrong phrasing, wrong level of formality. Clara Bennett felt the mistake immediately. She stood beside the wine station with a silver tray balanced against one palm, while rain continued sliding down the massive ballroom windows behind her. Every instinct inside her told her to stay quiet. That instinct had protected her for years. Stay invisible. Finish the shift. Go home. Pay the hospital bills. Repeat tomorrow. But then the ambassador spoke again. Slowly this time. Deliberately. And the translator still misunderstood him. Clara closed her eyes briefly. The ambassador was not insulted by the agreement itself. He was insulted by the implication hidden inside the phrasing. In his culture, the wording suggested ownership instead of partnership. One careless interpretation was poisoning the entire negotiation. Nathaniel's jaw tightened as whispers began spreading among investors near the back tables. A failed international deal would not stay private for long. By morning, every financial outlet in Manhattan would be talking about it. Tell His Excellency we value mutual leadership, Nathaniel said firmly. The translator repeated the sentence awkwardly. Ambassador Al-Fayed's expression hardened immediately. The older man removed his hand from the table and leaned back slightly, disappointment settling visibly into his features. One of his aides began gathering documents. Nathaniel noticed the movement instantly. The deal was slipping away. There seems to be a misunderstanding, Nathaniel said carefully. Perhaps we should continue after dinner. No, the ambassador answered directly in English for the first time that evening. His voice remained calm, but cold enough to quiet the room completely. Misunderstanding is dangerous in business, Mr. Reed. Silence followed. Heavy. Public. Nathaniel felt dozens of eyes turning toward him. Board members. Investors. Political donors. People who had spent years believing Nathaniel Reed controlled every room he entered. And now an elderly ambassador was dismantling his billion-dollar negotiation in front of all of them. Clara lowered her tray slowly. Her heartbeat remained calm despite the tension tightening across the ballroom. She recognized that look in the ambassador's eyes. Not anger. Disappointment. The kind that came when someone felt unseen, unheard, misrepresented. She had seen it before during university conferences years ago. Before life became hospital shifts, overdue notices, and emergency overtime. Mr. Reed, one executive whispered nervously beside him, "We cannot lose this contract." Nathaniel ignored him. His attention remained locked on the ambassador. For the first time all night, uncertainty touched his expression openly. Then the translator made the final mistake. Trying to recover, he quickly addressed the ambassador in rushed modern Arabic. But his pronunciation twisted one formal title into something unintentionally dismissive. Small, almost invisible, yet devastating. Clara saw the ambassador's eyes darken immediately. One aide stood up from the table. Chairs shifted quietly across the ballroom. Nathaniel looked between them, frustration beginning to crack through his calm exterior. "What did he say?" he demanded quietly toward the translator. The man swallowed hard. I may have mistranslated part of the honorific structure." Nathaniel stared at him in disbelief. "May have." The ballroom seemed smaller suddenly. Hotter. Even the chandelier lights felt sharper now. Clara looked toward the rain beyond the glass walls, then back toward the table. She knew exactly what would happen next. The ambassador would leave. The press would hear rumors by midnight. Reed Global Holdings would lose billions before the markets even opened. And all because nobody in the room truly understood the language being spoken. Her fingers tightened slightly against the silver tray. "Stay quiet," she told herself again. "This is not your life anymore." But another voice answered softly inside her. The older voice. The one she buried years ago. The voice that once stood confidently inside university lecture halls translating diplomatic transcripts faster than entire teams of graduate students. Across the ballroom, Nathaniel rubbed a hand across his jaw, trying to maintain control while panic quietly gathered beneath his composure. Then Ambassador Al-Fayed spoke one final sentence in formal Arabic. Slow, clear, disappointed. The translator froze completely. He did not understand it at all. The silence that followed felt endless. Clara moved before she could stop herself. She set the silver tray carefully onto the edge of a nearby table. The soft clink of glass against metal somehow echoed across the room. Several heads turned toward her immediately. Nathaniel noticed her approaching and frowned slightly. The waitress in the cream-colored dress walked calmly toward the center table beneath the crystal lights, while rain trembled softly against the windows behind her. Every step was quiet, measured, controlled. She stopped beside the translator and lowered her gaze respectfully toward the ambassador. Then, in flawless classical Arabic, Clara spoke softly. "With respect, Your Excellency, I believe what you intended to say was that trust cannot survive where dignity is misunderstood." The entire ballroom went still, completely still. Nathaniel Reed stared at her as if the floor beneath him had just disappeared. No one moved. The chandeliers continued glowing above the ballroom, but suddenly the light felt different somehow. Sharper, colder. Every conversation had stopped the moment Clara Bennett finished speaking. Even the rain against the towering glass windows seemed quieter now. Ambassador Karim Al-Fayed looked directly at her for several long seconds. Not surprised, not confused, interested. Beside him, one of his aides slowly lowered the folder he had been preparing to carry out of the room. Nathaniel Reed remained frozen near the center table, his bourbon glass still in one hand though he no longer seemed aware of it. The waitress in the cream-colored dress stood calmly beneath the crystal lights after speaking a level of formal Arabic that most translators spent decades trying to master. The silence stretched so long it became uncomfortable. Then, slowly, the ambassador smiled. It was small, barely visible, but it changed the entire atmosphere of the room. He answered her immediately in rapid Arabic, his deep voice smooth and elegant. Clara listened without interrupting. Nathaniel looked sharply toward the official translator, expecting him to respond this time. The man could not. He stood speechless, color draining slowly from his face. Clara finally nodded once toward the ambassador before replying fluently. Her tone remained respectful, precise, calm, like someone who belonged in conversations far more important than this ballroom. Several executives exchanged stunned glances. One senator quietly whispered, "Who is she?" No one had an answer. Nathaniel watched Clara carefully now, really watched her for the first time all night. The way she carried herself had changed completely, though in truth nothing about her posture was different. The difference was his perception. Only minutes ago, all he saw was a waitress in a simple dress. Now every movement looked deliberate, educated, controlled, dangerous in the quietest possible way. Ambassador Al-Fayed turned toward Nathaniel and finally spoke in English again. "Your employee understands diplomacy better than your translator." The words landed softly, which somehow made them worse. A few nervous laughs escaped around the table before quickly dying again. Nathaniel forced himself to recover. "Miss Bennett," he said carefully, "you speak Arabic?" Clara lowered her eyes politely. "Yes, sir." "Where did you learn classical diplomatic Arabic?" Nathaniel asked. Clara hesitated only briefly. "Georgetown University." Another silence. One executive nearly choked on his drink. Nathaniel stared at her. Georgetown. Not a community college night class. Not a hobby. Georgetown. One of the most respected international language programs in the country. The image he had built of her inside his mind began cracking apart piece by piece. Ambassador Al-Fayed spoke again in Arabic, slower this time. Clara translated smoothly. "His Excellency says the concern was never about authority over transportation routes. The concern was whether your company views partnership as mutual respect or financial control." Nathaniel's expression tightened. That single clarification changed everything. The translator had completely distorted the meaning of the negotiation. One mistranslation had nearly destroyed a $4 billion agreement. "Please tell His Excellency that was never our intention," Nathaniel said immediately. Clara translated with careful precision, adjusting certain formalities naturally as she spoke. The ambassador listened, then nodded once. Around the ballroom, tension slowly began loosening. Investors relaxed visibly. Glasses lifted again. Quiet conversations cautiously returned. But Nathaniel barely noticed any of it. His attention remained fixed on Clara Bennett. Rainwater shimmered down the windows behind her, while chandelier light reflected softly against her cream-colored dress. The same dress he mocked less than an hour earlier. Suddenly he remembered every word he had said, every laugh around the table, every assumption. And for the first time in years, Nathaniel Reed felt embarrassed in public. Not because someone attacked him, not because he lost control, but because he realized he had revealed something ugly about himself in front of everyone important in the room. Clara continued translating calmly, while the ambassador resumed discussions with the executives. Her voice never rose. She never tried to impress anyone. She simply spoke with quiet confidence while billion-dollar negotiations stabilized around her. One investor leaned toward another and whispered, "She is better than the official interpreter." Nathaniel heard it clearly. So did the translator standing nearby with lowered eyes. The humiliation settled deeper into Nathaniel's chest. Not because Clara embarrassed him intentionally. That would have been easier to handle. No, what unsettled him was her complete lack of cruelty. She could have exposed him, could have humiliated him publicly after his comments about her appearance. Instead, she saved the deal anyway. Saved him anyway. That kind of grace was far rarer than intelligence. Ambassador Al-Fayed suddenly smiled again and addressed Clara directly in Arabic. This time her expression softened slightly before she translated. "His Excellency says elegance is often misunderstood in America." Several guests laughed quietly, though Nathaniel did not. The ambassador continued speaking while studying Clara carefully. She listened, then lowered her gaze almost modestly before responding. Nathaniel noticed something then. The ambassador was no longer speaking to her like a waitress. He was speaking to her like an equal, like someone trained in diplomatic culture, someone educated, someone who once belonged inside rooms exactly like this one. Nathaniel glanced toward Clara's old black heels beneath the edge of her dress. One side was slightly worn near the sole. Tiny detail, easy to miss, but suddenly it bothered him more than any insult possibly could. Because he realized she was standing inside one of the richest rooms in Manhattan, wearing shoes she probably could not afford to replace. And somehow she still carried herself with more dignity than half the people surrounding her. Thunder rolled softly outside while the city lights blurred behind the rain-covered glass. Clara finished translating another sentence for the ambassador, her voice calm and steady beneath the chandeliers. Nathaniel Reed said nothing, because for the first time that evening, the most powerful man in the ballroom no longer felt like the most important person in the room. The ballroom slowly came back to life, but something fundamental had changed beneath the golden lights of the Blackstone Grand Hotel. Conversations resumed in softer voices now. Investors who had once ignored the waitress in the cream-colored dress suddenly watched her every movement with quiet fascination. Even the servers passing through the room stared discreetly toward Clara Bennett, as if seeing her for the first time. Nathaniel Reed stood near the center table while Ambassador Kareem Al-Fayed reviewed the revised contract terms with his legal team. The crisis had passed. The partnership was alive again. Yet Nathaniel barely heard the numbers being discussed around him. His thoughts remained fixed on one impossible detail. Georgetown University, classical Arabic, diplomatic protocol. None of it fit the image he had constructed so confidently only an hour earlier. Clara moved calmly beside the ambassador, translating technical clauses with precise professionalism while thunder rolled softly outside over Manhattan. She never stumbled over a phrase, never searched for words. Every sentence arrived smooth and measured, carrying the kind of discipline that only came from years of training. Nathaniel noticed something else too. The ambassador trusted her now, completely. Whenever confusion surfaced between the legal teams, Kareem Al-Fayed looked toward Clara before anyone else. And every time she answered, tension disappeared from the room almost immediately. Remarkable, one investor whispered quietly near Nathaniel. She understands cultural nuance better than most consultants we hire. Nathaniel did not respond. He remembered his own words instead. Interesting choice for an international event. The memory sat heavily in his chest now. Clara finished translating another paragraph before stepping back respectfully to allow the lawyers to continue reviewing documents. For the first time in nearly 20 minutes, her shoulders lowered slightly with exhaustion. Nathaniel noticed it immediately. Beneath her calm composure, she was tired, deeply tired, the kind of exhaustion that lived in someone for years instead of hours. She turned quietly toward the service station, probably intending to return to her normal duties as if none of this had happened. Miss Bennett. Nathaniel's voice stopped her halfway across the ballroom. Several nearby conversations faded again instantly. Clara turned slowly. Yes, Mr. Reed. He approached her carefully now. Not with arrogance. Not with performance. Carefully, as if uncertain which version of himself she had already seen. Up close, Nathaniel noticed faint shadows beneath her eyes hidden carefully beneath makeup. He noticed the small crease near one sleeve where the dress had clearly been folded away for years before tonight. Tiny details. Human details. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. Clara's expression remained composed. There is no need. There is, Nathaniel answered immediately. I spoke to you disrespectfully. The words felt unfamiliar leaving his mouth in public. Powerful men rarely apologized where others could hear them. But Nathaniel no longer cared about appearances in that moment. Not after realizing how badly he had misjudged her. Clara held his gaze for a second before looking away politely. Tonight was stressful for everyone. Nathaniel almost laughed softly at that. She was making it easier for him. Even now. You saved the deal, he said. You saved me from humiliating myself in front of every investor in this room. Clara shook her head gently. I only clarified a misunderstanding. The simplicity of her answer unsettled him more than praise ever could. Most people would have used this moment to gain leverage. Recognition. Attention. Clara Bennett seemed determined to avoid all three. Behind them, Ambassador Al-Fayed signed the final preliminary agreement while cameras flashed quietly near the stage. Applause spread through the ballroom. The deal was officially moving forward. Several executives relaxed visibly for the first time all evening. Nathaniel barely reacted. His focus remained entirely on the woman standing in front of him beneath the chandelier light. Why are you working here? He asked before he could stop himself. Clara looked slightly surprised by the question. Because they pay hourly. Nathaniel exhaled quietly. Even her humor arrived softly. Controlled. That is not what I meant. Clara glanced toward the ballroom windows where rain still traced silver lines against the glass. Life changes, she said after a moment. People adapt. Nathaniel studied her carefully. There was history inside that sentence. Pain too. But she carried both with remarkable grace. Before he could ask another question, one of the ambassador's aides approached Clara with a respectful nod. His Excellency would like a word with you privately. Clara nodded politely and followed the aide toward a quieter corner near the balcony overlooking the city. Nathaniel watched her leave. Around him, the ballroom returned fully to celebration mode now that billions of dollars were no longer hanging by a thread. Champagne bottles reopened. Laughter returned. Politicians smiled for photographs. Yet Nathaniel felt strangely detached from all of it. For years he believed intelligence announced itself loudly. Expensive suits, prestigious titles, elite circles. But Clara Bennett had entered the ballroom wearing old heels and a borrowed dress. And within minutes, she had become the most respected person in the room without ever demanding attention. That realization stayed with him long after the applause faded. Near the balcony windows, Ambassador Al-Fayed spoke quietly to Clara in Arabic while Manhattan glowed beneath the rain outside. Nathaniel could not hear the conversation, but he noticed the ambassador's expression soften in a way it never had during the negotiations. Then something unexpected happened. The ambassador placed one hand respectfully over his heart and bowed his head slightly toward Clara Bennett. A gesture of genuine admiration. Nathaniel stared in silence. Because men like Kareem Al-Fayed did not offer respect casually. And suddenly Nathaniel Reed understood something uncomfortable with perfect clarity. The woman he mocked at the beginning of the evening was someone extraordinary. And the worst part was that she had revealed her worth only after he failed to see it himself. The celebration inside the ballroom grew louder with every passing minute, but Clara Bennett felt strangely distant from it all. Laughter echoed beneath the chandeliers while servers carried fresh champagne to tables filled with relieved investors and smiling executives. Outside, rain continued falling over Manhattan in silver waves, blurring the city lights beyond the towering glass walls. Near the balcony, Ambassador Kareem Al-Fayed spoke softly to Clara in Arabic while the sounds of celebration faded into the background. "You handled yourself with remarkable dignity tonight," he told her warmly. Clara lowered her eyes respectfully. "Thank you, Your Excellency." The ambassador studied her carefully for a moment. "You were trained for diplomatic work." It was not a question. Clara hesitated. "A long time ago. Not long enough to forget," he replied gently. The older man glanced back toward the ballroom where Nathaniel Reed stood surrounded by executives pretending not to watch them. Men like Mr. Reed spend their lives studying markets and power. The ambassador continued quietly. But very few learn how to truly see people. Clara said nothing, because the truth was, she had spent years trying not to be seen at all. The ambassador reached into his suit pocket and handed her an elegant white business card with gold lettering pressed into the surface. "If you ever wish to return to international work, contact my office." Clara accepted the card carefully. "That is very kind." "No," the ambassador answered softly. "What is kind is that you protected a room full of arrogant strangers after being disrespected by them." Clara looked down at the card silently while thunder rolled faintly beyond the city skyline. Before she could respond, the ambassador smiled gently. "Some people wear wealth loudly because they fear silence. You do not." Then he excused himself toward the photographers gathering near the ballroom entrance. Clara remained alone beside the rain-covered windows for several seconds. Her reflection stared back faintly through the glass. Cream dress, tired eyes, hair beginning to loosen slightly from the long shift. Nothing about her appearance suggested someone who once competed for international fellowship placements in Washington. Nothing suggested the girl who used to spend entire nights translating diplomatic archives while dreaming about representing the United States abroad one day. Life had changed faster than ambition could survive. Hospital bills, her mother's stroke, student loans, endless overtime shifts. Reality had a way of rewriting people quietly. "Miss Bennett." Nathaniel's voice came from behind her again. Clara turned slowly. He had removed his suit jacket now, loosening the sharp perfection he carried earlier in the evening. Without the constant performance of authority surrounding him, he looked unexpectedly human. Tired even. "I hope I am not interrupting," he said carefully. "Not at all." Nathaniel glanced toward the business card still resting lightly in her hand. The ambassador seemed impressed. Clara folded the card gently into her apron pocket. He was being polite. Nathaniel almost smiled at that. I do not think Kareem Al-Fayed does anything politely. Clara looked away toward the storm outside. Maybe not. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them felt different now. Not tense. Thoughtful. Nathaniel rested one hand lightly against the balcony railing. You could have embarrassed me tonight, he admitted quietly. Clara frowned slightly. That was never my intention. Exactly. Nathaniel looked down briefly before continuing. Most people in that situation would have enjoyed watching me fail after the way I treated them. Clara answered honestly. Watching people humiliate themselves is rarely satisfying. Nathaniel stared at her after that sentence. The simplicity of it unsettled him deeply because he knew she was right. Earlier that evening, he had mocked her dress publicly without hesitation. Yet Clara Bennett possessed every opportunity to destroy his credibility in front of investors, politicians, and foreign delegates. Instead, she protected the negotiation first and his pride second. That level of restraint was something Nathaniel realized he himself might not have shown. Why did you leave Georgetown? He asked quietly. Clara's fingers tightened slightly against the edge of her apron. There it was. The question she spent years avoiding. My mother became ill during my final year, she answered after a moment. I needed to work. Nathaniel waited, sensing there was more. Clara gave a faint smile that carried no bitterness, only exhaustion. Life rarely pauses so people can finish their plans. The ballroom lights reflected softly in Nathaniel's eyes as he studied her. He suddenly imagined Clara years earlier inside classrooms, filled with ambitious students preparing for diplomatic careers. He imagined professors recognizing her talent immediately. He imagined opportunities disappearing one by one after hospital visits replaced internships and unpaid bills replaced future plans. Something heavy settled quietly in his chest. Guilt, perhaps, or shame. You deserved better than this, he said before thinking. Clara looked genuinely surprised by the statement. Then she shook her head gently. This is still honest work, Mr. Reed. Nathaniel exhaled softly. Even now she defended her dignity without anger. That grace made his earlier behavior feel even uglier in retrospect. Across the ballroom, guests continued celebrating the successful agreement while cameras flashed near the stage. But Nathaniel no longer cared about the deal itself. Not really. Because tonight had exposed something far more uncomfortable than a failed negotiation. It exposed the dangerous arrogance of believing status revealed character. Clara glanced toward the clock near the ballroom entrance. Almost midnight. Her shift would end soon, though tomorrow morning another one would begin again. Endless cycles of exhaustion hidden beneath professionalism. Nathaniel followed her gaze. You are still working tomorrow, are you not? Clara smiled faintly. Rent in Manhattan does not usually disappear overnight. Nathaniel laughed quietly despite himself. It was the first genuine laugh he had allowed all evening. Clara noticed the sound immediately. Softer than before, less rehearsed. Then the ballroom manager suddenly hurried toward them looking pale with panic. Clara, he whispered urgently. The mayor's table is requesting Arabic coffee service and none of the staff knows the formal presentation sequence. Nathaniel watched Clara close her eyes briefly with tired amusement before calmly nodding. I will handle it. And just like that, the woman who had saved $1 billion negotiation returned quietly to work while half the people in the ballroom still did not understand who she truly was. By the time the final round of speeches ended, Manhattan was nearly asleep beneath the storm. Rainwater streamed along the hotel windows while exhausted staff members quietly cleared crystal glasses and folded white linen napkins beneath the fading glow of the chandeliers. The ballroom that had once vibrated with power and tension now carried the softer atmosphere of relief. Investors shook hands near the exits. Politicians posed for final photographs. Luxury cars lined up outside beneath umbrellas held carefully by hotel attendants. Clara Bennett stood alone near the service station, organizing silver trays with calm precision despite the ache spreading through her shoulders. Midnight shifts always settled into the body slowly, like cold weather. She adjusted the loose strand of hair near her cheek and glanced briefly toward the clock above the ballroom doors. 12:37 in the morning. 4 more hours before she could finally sleep. You should not still be working after tonight. Nathaniel Reed's voice came quietly from behind her. Clara turned slowly. He had removed his tie completely now, and the sharp edges of his corporate image seemed softer somehow beneath the dim ballroom lighting. The dishes unfortunately do not care about billion-dollar negotiations, Clara answered gently. Nathaniel smiled faintly before looking around the nearly empty room. Everyone keeps asking about you. Clara continued stacking polished glasses carefully onto the tray. That will probably stop tomorrow. I doubt that. Nathaniel leaned lightly against the edge of the service counter. The ambassador personally told 3 senators you saved the evening. Clara lowered her eyes. He was generous. Nathaniel studied her quietly. It fascinated him how naturally she deflected praise. Most people spend entire lives trying to be noticed inside rooms like this. Clara Bennett seemed determined to disappear from them. Across the ballroom, the official translator left quickly through a side exit without speaking to anyone. Several executives watched him go with obvious disappointment. Nathaniel noticed Clara glance toward the door briefly before returning to her work. You could have embarrassed him too, Nathaniel said softly. Clara frowned slightly. The translator? Nathaniel nodded. You protected his dignity as much as mine. Clara carefully folded a linen cloth before answering. People make mistakes under pressure. Nathaniel stared at her for several seconds. That answer stayed with him because it revealed something uncomfortable about himself again. Earlier that night, he had mocked her publicly over a dress. Yet she continued choosing kindness toward people who failed her repeatedly. He was beginning to realize Clara Bennett possessed a kind of quiet strength money could not purchase. A young waiter hurried past carrying empty champagne bottles before whispering excitedly to another employee nearby. That is her, he said quietly, glancing toward Clara. The waitress who speaks Arabic. Clara pretended not to hear them. Nathaniel noticed that too. She was embarrassed by attention rather than energized by it. Can I ask you something honestly? Nathaniel said after a moment. Clara looked up cautiously. You usually do. Another faint smile touched Nathaniel's face before fading again. Why did you never go back? Clara's hands paused briefly over the silverware. She knew exactly what he meant. Georgetown. Diplomacy. The future she abandoned years ago. Rain tapped softly against the glass walls behind them while distant thunder rolled somewhere beyond the city. Because life became expensive, she answered quietly. Nathaniel waited. Clara exhaled slowly. My mother's rehabilitation treatments were not covered by insurance after the 2nd year. I worked nights during school at first, but eventually work became permanent. Nathaniel felt something tighten painfully in his chest. You gave up your career. Clara shook her head gently. I made a choice. At 22 years old. Clara gave a tired smile. Sometimes adulthood arrives early. Nathaniel looked away briefly toward the empty ballroom. Crystal chandeliers. Imported wine. Floral arrangements worth thousands of dollars already beginning to wilt at the edges. Earlier that evening he had mocked her clothing while she quietly carried the weight of hospital bills and sacrificed ambitions nobody in the room even knew existed. The realization left a bitter taste in his mouth. My father used to say successful people earn their place in life, Nathaniel admitted quietly. Clara listened without interrupting. Tonight, I realized some people never even receive the same starting point. Clara studied him carefully after that sentence. It was the first truly honest thing he had said all night. Before she could answer, her phone vibrated softly inside her apron pocket. Clara checked the screen and immediately straightened with concern. Nathaniel noticed the change in her expression instantly. Is everything all right? Clara nodded too quickly. Yes, just the overnight nurse checking in. But Nathaniel caught the exhaustion hidden beneath her calm voice. Your mother? Clara slipped the phone away gently. Some nights are harder than others. Nathaniel wanted to ask more, but something stopped him. Respect perhaps. Clara had revealed enough already. Nearby, ballroom staff began shutting down sections of lighting one row at a time, leaving parts of the enormous room dimmer and quieter. The celebration was finally ending. Clara reached for another tray when Nathaniel suddenly noticed the worn skin near her fingertips. Tiny marks from years of carrying hot plates and heavy serving trays. Working hands. Not the hands of someone who was supposed to spend her life inside restaurants. You know, Nathaniel said quietly, when you walked into the ballroom tonight, I thought I understood exactly who you were. Clara looked at him calmly. Most people do. Nathaniel shook his head slowly. No, most people assume. Their eyes met across the service counter while rain shimmered down the windows behind them. For a brief moment, neither looked away. Then one of the hotel managers hurried across the ballroom carrying a tablet with visible panic on his face. "Mr. Reed," he called urgently. "There is a problem with the signed transportation addendum. The ambassador's legal office is requesting immediate clarification before morning release." Nathaniel's expression tightened immediately. Another problem. Another misunderstanding waiting to happen. The manager continued nervously. "Their office specifically asked if Miss Bennet could assist again." Silence followed for one heartbeat. Then Nathaniel looked toward Clara slowly. But this time there was no arrogance left in his eyes. Only trust. The ballroom had emptied by nearly half when Clara Bennet followed Nathaniel Reed and the hotel manager into a smaller executive conference room overlooking the rain-soaked skyline of Manhattan. The celebration downstairs continued in distant echoes now, softened by thick walls and expensive carpeting. Inside the room, only a few lights remained on above a polished walnut table covered with legal documents, translation notes, and half-finished cups of cold coffee. Clara quietly closed the door behind her while one of Ambassador Kareem Al-Fayed's legal advisors adjusted his glasses and looked visibly relieved to see her. "Miss Bennet," the older man said warmly, "thank you for staying." Clara nodded politely. "Of course." Nathaniel watched the interaction silently. It still unsettled him how naturally international officials respected her. Not because she demanded authority, because she carried it without effort. The legal advisor slid a document across the table. "There is concern regarding one phrase in the transportation addendum," he explained carefully. "The English version states exclusive operational oversight, but the Arabic translation implies unilateral control." Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. Another dangerous misunderstanding. Clara pulled the document closer beneath the warm overhead light. Her tired eyes moved quickly across both versions while rain streaked softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her. The room remained silent except for the quiet turning of pages. Nathaniel found himself watching her hands again. Calm hands. Precise hands. Not rushed despite the late hour and exhaustion pulling visibly at her posture. After a moment, Clara looked up gently. "The issue is not the translation itself," she explained softly. "It is the historical implication of the wording." The legal advisor nodded immediately. "Exactly." Nathaniel frowned slightly. "Explain it to me." Clara hesitated briefly before answering. In certain diplomatic contexts, the phrase operational oversight carries associations with foreign intervention rather than equal partnership. Nathaniel stared at the document. One phrase can change all of that. Clara gave a faint, tired smile. Words matter more when countries are involved. The simplicity of her answer filled the room quietly. Nathaniel suddenly realized how many negotiations he had approached purely through numbers and leverage, while completely overlooking cultural memory and human perception. Clara adjusted 2 lines of wording with a pen before sliding the document back toward the advisor. "This version preserves authority equally on both sides without implying ownership." The older man read it carefully, then slowly smiled. "Perfect." Nathaniel leaned back slightly in his chair, stunned again by how effortlessly she solved problems that had nearly unraveled an international agreement twice in one night. "You should be sitting on the other side of these tables," he said quietly before thinking. Clara lowered her gaze toward the documents. Life had different plans. The room fell silent again. Outside the windows, lightning flickered faintly across distant clouds above the city. Nathaniel noticed Clara suppress a small yawn while organizing the corrected pages. It was almost 2 in the morning now. Most executives would have left hours ago. Yet she remained calm, focused, professional. "Miss Bennet," the legal advisor said carefully, "have you ever considered returning to diplomatic work?" Clara's fingers paused slightly against the paper. Nathaniel watched her expression soften with something almost painful. "Sometimes considering something and affording it are different things," she answered quietly. The older man looked saddened by the response. Nathaniel felt the words settle heavily inside him too. For years he believed talent naturally rose to the top. Tonight he was confronting an uncomfortable truth instead. Sometimes talent simply became exhausted. The legal advisor gathered the corrected documents carefully before standing. "You have done more for this agreement tonight than anyone realizes." Clara offered a polite smile. "I'm glad it helped." Before leaving, the older man paused beside Nathaniel. "Mr. Reed," he said calmly, "people like Miss Bennet are rare. Do not make the mistake of overlooking her again." Then he exited quietly, leaving only Nathaniel and Clara alone inside the conference room. Rain continued whispering softly against the glass while the city glowed beneath them in silver reflections. Clara slowly removed her heels beneath the table for just a second, rubbing one sore ankle discreetly before slipping them back on. Nathaniel noticed anyway. The sight hit him unexpectedly hard. Earlier that evening, he mocked her appearance while she silently worked through physical exhaustion. Most people in his world would never survive for long. "You should go home," he said gently. Clara gathered the final papers into neat stacks. "My shift technically ends in 20 minutes. Nathaniel shook his head slightly. "After everything tonight, I think the hotel can survive without you carrying trays for another 20 minutes. Clara laughed softly under her breath. Quiet. Genuine. It was the first time Nathaniel had heard the sound all evening. "You are very different now from the man at the ballroom entrance," she said carefully. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair slowly. That man embarrassed himself. Clara looked toward the rain-covered skyline. Maybe that man was simply used to people looking expensive instead of looking tired. The words were gentle, but they landed harder than criticism. Nathaniel looked down briefly at the gold watch resting against his wrist. A gift from his father after closing his first major acquisition at 29 years old. He suddenly remembered his father once telling him, "Success teaches you who matters." Tonight, Clara Bennett had quietly taught him the opposite. Success often blinds people to who matters most. "I owe you more than an apology," Nathaniel admitted quietly. Clara shook her head immediately. "No, yes." He looked directly at her now. "You saved the agreement. You protected my company. And somehow you still protected my dignity after I did not deserve it." Clara met his eyes calmly across the table. Humiliating people rarely changes them. Nathaniel sat very still after that sentence. Because deep down, he knew she was right again. Outside, the rain finally began slowing over Manhattan while the lights of the sleeping city shimmered beneath the storm clouds. Inside the quiet conference room, Clara Bennett carefully gathered the last corrected documents with the same grace she carried all evening. No arrogance, no bitterness, just quiet dignity. And for the first time in many years, Nathaniel Reed realized he was sitting across from someone wealthier than he was in all the ways that truly mattered. By the time Clara Bennett finally stepped out of the Blackstone Grand Hotel, Manhattan had gone quiet beneath the fading storm. The rain had softened into a cold mist drifting between skyscrapers, while reflections of yellow taxi lights shimmered across the wet pavement. It was almost 3 in the morning. Her feet ached. Her shoulders burned with exhaustion. And yet the city somehow felt different tonight. Behind her, the revolving hotel doors turned slowly as the last wealthy guests disappeared into waiting black cars and private chauffeurs. Clara pulled her thin cream-colored coat tighter against the cold and began walking toward the subway entrance half a block away. She preferred the subway at night. Fewer people, fewer questions. The sound of footsteps behind her made her pause slightly. "Miss Bennett." Nathaniel Reed stood beneath the hotel awning holding a dark umbrella while rainwater glimmered softly around him. Without the ballroom lights and executives surrounding him, he looked strangely out of place on the quiet Manhattan sidewalk. More human than powerful. Clara stopped walking politely. "Mr. Reed." Nathaniel approached slowly. "Please do not tell me you are taking the subway home after working a 16-hour shift." Clara almost smiled faintly. "The subway has worked perfectly well for years." Nathaniel looked toward the nearly empty street before back at her worn black heels. "At least allow my driver to take you home." Clara hesitated automatically. Pride and survival often learn to coexist carefully. "That is not necessary." "I know." Nathaniel's voice remained calm. "But I would still like to." Rain tapped softly against the umbrella above them, while distant sirens echoed somewhere across the sleeping city. Clara studied him quietly. Earlier that evening, she would have assumed the offer came from guilt or obligation. But now something about his expression felt different. Honest perhaps. Tired in the same way she was tired. After a long moment, Clara nodded once. "Thank you." Nathaniel opened the car door himself when the black sedan pulled forward beneath the hotel lights. Clara noticed the gesture immediately. Men like Nathaniel Reed were not accustomed to opening doors for anyone. The drive downtown passed mostly in silence while rain blurred across the windows beside them. Manhattan at 3 in the morning looked softer somehow. Less performative. Diners glowing quietly on empty corners. Steam rising from subway grates. streetlights reflecting gold against wet asphalt. Nathaniel sat across from Clara in the back seat without checking his phone once. That alone felt remarkable. "Can I ask you something?" he said quietly after several minutes. Clara nodded slightly. "Why did you stay kind tonight?" Nathaniel looked genuinely confused by his own question. "After the way I treated you." Clara watched the city lights pass outside the window. "Because cruelty is expensive." Nathaniel frowned slightly. Clara continued softly. "People think anger costs nothing because it happens quickly, but eventually it costs relationships. Respect. Peace. Sometimes entire futures." Nathaniel remained silent after that. Her words settled heavily inside the quiet car. He thought about boardrooms filled with intimidation tactics. Employees too nervous to disagree with him. Relationships reduced to transactions. Somewhere along the way, success had slowly trained him to confuse power with value. The car finally stopped outside a modest brick apartment building on the Lower East Side. Nathaniel looked out the window in surprise. The neighborhood was clean but old. Humble. Nothing like the luxury towers where most people in his social circle lived. Clara reached for the door handle. "Thank you for the ride." Nathaniel looked at the building again before speaking carefully. "Would it offend you if I asked to help?" Clara paused. "Help? Your mother's medical care. Tuition. Anything." Clara's expression softened with understanding rather than offense. "You think tonight created a debt." Nathaniel started to answer, but stopped. Because deep down, she was right. Clara gave him a small, tired smile. "You do not owe me money, Mr. Reed." "Nathaniel," he corrected quietly. Clara looked at him for a long moment while rain whispered against the car roof above them. "Nathaniel," she repeated gently. Somehow hearing his first name from her sounded different than hearing it from anyone else. "Real. Then let me offer something else," he said carefully. "A position at Reed Global. International Relations. Cultural Strategy. Whatever title you want." Clara blinked in genuine surprise. Nathaniel continued before she could answer. "You belong in rooms where your voice matters." Clara looked down briefly at her hands folded quietly in her lap. Hands tired from years of carrying trays instead of diplomatic files. "I appreciate that more than you realize," she admitted softly. "But I spent a long time surviving without expecting rescue." Nathaniel shook his head immediately. "This is not rescue." He looked directly at her now. "It is respect." Silence filled the car again. Outside, rain drifted gently through the pale street lights while the city rested around them. Clara finally smiled then. Small, genuine, beautiful in its quietness. "I will think about it." Nathaniel exhaled softly, almost relieved she had not refused completely. Clara stepped out onto the wet sidewalk and turned back before closing the car door. "You know something strange?" she said softly. Nathaniel looked up. "What?" Clara glanced toward the sleeping city around them. "The most expensive thing I wore tonight was dignity." Then she closed the door gently and walked toward the apartment entrance beneath the fading rain. Nathaniel remained motionless inside the car long after she disappeared upstairs. The city lights reflected softly across the window beside him while her words echoed quietly in his mind. Hours earlier, he had judged a woman by a simple dress. But Clara Bennett had walked into a ballroom full of powerful people wearing old heels, exhaustion, and silent sacrifice, and somehow left carrying the only thing no amount of money could buy: respect.